G'day, welcome back. Next video in my series on edge cases. Haven't done one for a while, where I look at end games and look very closely at like drawing zones, winning zones, and so on, and try and work out why those zones exist and what makes one square a win and one other square a draw, and so on. And you can see, for instance, in the thumbnail, I've got a typical example there, which is from the Averbakh book. And you can see the top bit of the chart is a drawing zone, but if the white king is inside that little box, it's a win for white. And then we'll go through it again, but remember the way I'm doing this is that I look at the edge of that boundary and just work out how white moves to win in those situations. This one's quite straightforward, but that's exactly what we're doing. And in this video in particular, we're going to look at a bunch of rook versus pawn. Don't normally look at those endings too much, but there's a lot of material on that in Averbakh, and that's what we're going to go through a few of the positions. And I made a couple of little improvements to my sort of simulator and also the way to look at it in Skid versus PC. So a little bit of stuff to go through today. I'm not too sure how far I'm going to go because Averbakh has a whole series of these diagrams, which you can find them on the internet on blogs and things and all that sort of stuff, right? And I've just sort of taken my own take on them. So let's have a look at that. Actually, we'll just quickly go across to the capture screen, and I've got a couple of things there. Bring that up in a second. This is typical. There's this website here I found, thomasstonk.jimdofree.com. Seems to have some program called Chess Suite. But anyway, he's got a number of pages here on the Averbakh Rook versus pawn drawing zones. And you can see, for instance, that one's got its diagram number 40, right? So there's a lot of diagrams that he does in terms of the drawing zones. And I think the one on the front page I did was position number 1. And basically for each sort of different position of how far advanced the pawn is, which file is it in, where is his king in terms of supporting the pawn, and where's the white king? Because that tends to be that the white king is on the opposite side of the black king in this case. That it's actually more beneficial because you have this whole concept of shouldering off. And then I might actually pick a couple of pictures from, this is my copy of Fundamental Chess Endings by Muller and Lamprecht. Great resource. I've actually read quite a bit of it in time. You can see I got a little bit of green highlighting there. And for instance, there's that ready position there, which is just absolutely amazing. Only one winning move. So I'd really like to get onto that position too into my simulator and just show which lines are winning, why are they winning, all that sort of stuff, right? So that's basically the background of what we're going to be doing. And so let me close that internet, and we'll come back to that. That's Skid versus PC. We'll get back to this for each of these positions we look at. And the first position we're going to look at, we'll just fire it up. I've got my simulator here. 1 second. Averbakh position number 1. Okay, just let me make sure you can see the whole simulator. Let's put it on the top of the chess screen. If you remember how this works, just those top boxes on the right-hand side. So this means black to move, and the side is white, and white wins in this case, right? So you can see that in this position, with black to move, white only wins if he's on those green marks squared. The Averbakh position is actually with white to move, and we have this box, which is Averbakh position number 1. Let me just bring that up so you can compare. Okay, that looks about right. You can see the position there. I might have to go in and out of recording to get the little screen grabs from different blogs. Anyway, position 1, Averbakh Rook endgames. And you can see that this is a pawn on the 7th rank, the defending rook behind it, and a very aggressively placed black king, in this case, defending it from the E3 square. And then that drawing zone is all the squares which white has to be on in order to win the game. And the drawing zone at the top of the screen is it would be a draw in those cases because black would be able to advance his pawn. White would have to give up his rook. There we go. You can see it there because obviously as I go backwards and forwards, I'm using Pygame. So actually the cursor moves the rook around when I go off to the screen. So don't have two mice. So that's fine, good. And you can see that matches. I'm quite happy with that. And you can see the way I do it is that the green area is all that winning zone and the red area is the winning zone, but it's where white has to make a move, particular move, only could be more than one move, but has to make a particular move, otherwise he'll lose his advantage. Now it can just sort of, I quite like this. The reason why I designed this is just, what about the rook there? Same. The rook there, same. The rook there, same. And on D4 though, you can see the drawing zone changes. That's quite interesting, right? You'd say, what's the difference between there and there? Suddenly, the king on A4 is not in the winning zone. Interesting. Yep. So we might look into that, but I don't want to look into 2 cases because we might find that we actually look at these positions later because Averbach's got a whole bunch of positions which we're going to sort of gradually go through. And then what about if the rook is not behind the pawn? Once again, the winning zone shrinks because white is not pressuring the black king from move 1. Yeah, these are all pretty much the same. The white king has to be closer to be able to stop the pawn and be in a winning position. There's some particularly bad position. Obviously, can't be check. And then the other thing we can do is we guess what we did before, we can change the move to black to move. The winning zone is less. Result, draw. Okay, so just stay with win, white to move, and that's the zone. Now, you won't actually see it, but let me just forget that. Let me just run it. So I press C, which is calculate. Okay, so you can see that took about, I've cut it out, took about 30 seconds. It goes through each of those squares, and 5 seconds each square calculates the winning line. And you can see in this version on the simulator, it tries to give you an indication. So if you're on A1, the first move is king to B2, into B2, and then black can't do anything. Because basically, depending on what black does, you're going to slide up to, in this case, the second move is black just promotes. Black didn't promote, white would just move across and pick up the pawn, because if it was king to B2, for instance, we would play king to C2, and we attack the pawn twice, and we cover the queening square twice through X-ray. So what it's done is there's actually a set of squares here, where it's done all of them. That's G1, and then it's done A2, G2, A3. Maybe the most difficult case is A4, but you say A4, the first move is king to B3, and then black would logically play king to E2, and then we would play king to C2, and we've shot the pawn, and we are winning. So you can see that why that's the winning zone on that side of the board. If we just go back to, for instance, the square G1 or G2, you're obviously going to have to run to the square F1, and that blocks black, and black can't do anything. If his king doesn't hold the pawn, we'll take the pawn. If he pushes the pawn, we'll take the pawn. Right. So that's giving you the simulator. Let's go and have a look. I made a change to just quit from that to how this works. So yeah, let me just quickly show you what it did. It sort of went through these. You can see it went through that's sort of the return you get when you use Stockfish to calculate from within Python chess. So total calculations. So here we go. The file name here, I've given a standard file name. It creates a PGN with about 10 games in it, one for each of those squares. And let's go back to the start of this game. So this is the position on A4 we just talked about. Now, you can see the change I've made here. Let me just bring down the PGN so you can see what I've done. In the first comment, I've put the standard SKID formulation for SKID versus PC for drawing boxes. And you can see draw, percent draw, full, A1, gold. G1 gold. So all of the squares in the drawing zone, in inverted commas, have been made in gold color. Now, if you look at the drawing zone, and actually technically the way they've driven it includes like the F4 square, but F4 is covered by the black king, so you can't actually be there. And the second change I made is I made this a persistent comment, effectively, or markup, right? So I've got to put a kill switch on it so that I can turn it off, toggle it on and off. But the idea is now that as I step through the moves, you can see that actually it keeps the draw zone displayed, right? So that's I like that. That's sort of this addition I've done to the SKID versus PC code. I'll make another video showing how I did that. It's very simple. It's like less than 10 lines of code added. And so the idea is if you create a PGN where the game includes as the opening comment, like there in green, a markup, then that markup will be drawn on all of the positions going forwards. Now, of course, I've done different workarounds with my corresponding squares videos, basically having the comment on corresponding squares copied into each move, right? Which obviously went up with very big PGNs. This is a much neater way of doing it. Once I've shown how the corresponding squares work, I'll just put in the first comment and be able to display it and move backwards and forwards and do some variations, which normally didn't work very well on my corresponding squares. Obviously, it's going to be perfect for all these draw zone positions as well. So all we might do is position one. Let's have a go through some of these lines. If you go look at the Windows game list, there's what I said, right? So there is the fan, and this column here is telling you the combination of the king on A1 and the rook on D8, which is the two things. As you move the rook around, it tells you where the king is going to be. Okay, two lines there just because of putting around. Obviously, king to B5 doesn't do anything. So the main line is you bring the king in. Black's got a couple of choices. Move the king up. You can see it's a little bit heavy because there is a lot of annotation going on here, but that's fine. What's the winning move? Take it. Okay, good. And then let's go to, it's about the sixth game. Let's go to the top of the thing and same thing, move. just take it. That's another possibility. How about this side? I mentioned before, once you move your king there, black's got no sensible moves. Take it, go to the next one. That's the same. And the king there. And what it's showing, the second variation, the king to g3, which is actually the engine's giving me. Actually, that might be a new feature of Skin versus PC, which is nice. It's showing you the engine alternative as a second move. Yeah, it's not on the annotation. So from king to g3, if you played it, if it still works, let's add a variation, is that now it's a draw because we go there. Okay, that makes sense? So if we go back to the start, we actually need to move here, and then black's a bit stuff. And we might just quickly go to the last one. So in this case, we have to move towards the pawn, but both those moves actually win in this case because if we go the long way, which is not the given line by the engine, then it transfers. Okay, so that's Averbakh position number 1 with a drawing zone. If you can understand why that is a drawing zone. So let's move on to the next position. Let's go through them one by one. Okay, so let's move on to position number 2. You can see it there. It's basically position number 1 with a rook in a different position in front of the pawn. So let's go across to the position, do like there, and white to move. And guess what? It's basically the same drawing zone. Once again, it's not including those squares which the black king covers, but for obvious reasons. And let's have a look. You can move the rook around. It gets slightly different. There it's the same. There it's not. They can. It's very similar on this side of the ball. Although you can see it's different here because the drawing zone gets shrunk because the white king can't go to f1. This one, white to move. King has to be on f1 already. You'd need the king on f1. Check the king away, and then so that's kind of the outline for different positions. But we're looking at this one, and you can see, oh, there we go. There's our drawing. So do the same thing as before. I'll do this run in the background. Take about 30 seconds. I'll calculate for those squares. And you can see it's giving the move combinations there. So if the king's on a1, king moves to b2, and it's going to be the same process. The black pawn's going to drop after the move, king to c2. Next one, if you're on g1, then you go g f1, and then you can pick the pawn up. So actually the winning strategy looks exactly the same in all of those positions. So we can close this, open up that file. So this is going to be Ava2. See the strange file names I create. White to move, result white and white. Okay. Right. So here we are. And you can see the position set up there, and we can go through the lines. Engine running. See a little bit of black trying to take the opposition. Didn't help at all. One drops. Next one. Let's see how we win from kingside. Just march across. Very easy. And next game there, that's similar. This one, you can see king to f1 draws. King to g3 obviously doesn't. The king would march into e2. And then we go to just this one here. Once again, it's the same deal. You just walk your king across. Even if black takes the opposition. Here. Yeah. So anyway, so this is the idea. You should memorize that drawing zone. So when you're in a further away from this position in the distance, you know exactly, that'll be a win or a draw in that position. So that's position number 2. So let's move on to the next one. And you can see this is like a systematic endgame analysis. So now we move the pawn back to the 6th rank, and let's see what happens. So he doesn't actually give a drawing zone for this one. He just gives that position, and he gives a winning line. After d2, that's the only move worth playing. Then rook to a1, king to d3, king to f2, king to c2, king to e2. That is a win. Now, he doesn't give a drawing zone, so let's have a look at, let's fire up the simulator here. We're putting the rook there, white to move, and a win. So you can see the drawing zone is actually pretty big. Actually, expanded a little bit in this position with white to move. Okay, so let's do the calculation there and have a look at what's going on. I think you can kind of say that, like, what's the most distant square to be on? Probably the b5 square, king approach to c4, and then you're double attacking the d pawn. Got to move it. The only defense, really. Otherwise, we could take it with the rook, and then we would then obviously move to c3, double attacking it again, and then there's nothing to do. The pawn's going to drop. You take king e2, and then a king to c2, holding the pawn and keeping the double attack on the black very soon. So that's kind of the lines you're looking at, drawing zone. So let's have a look at the position. So you can see it's exactly what I said, right? Basically, if you're on a1, you just march across, hold the rook, and then you take the pawn. On this side, march across, and that would actually get you to the position we've just discussed. We might actually have a quick look at that when we load it up into Skid versus PC, and we can go through all the combinations. There's the worst worst one in inverted commas, go king to c4, which actually all those squares from d5 to d5, king to d4 is the winning move. Okay, good. So that has been created. Let me close that and let me file open. Should be this one. Well, the rook moves also draw in this case, to be honest, right? But let's go to which game. We want to look at this one. This is the one they gave, Averbakh gave, right? So we move there, and then now what does black do? Black can push the pawn. Now the rook moves away. Check. And we get the pawn that way. And there's obviously different possibilities here. For instance, rook slides away. Rather than king f3, let's try going around this way. Then this is the most sensible way of doing it. Okay, if you're not going to go to c2, what are you going to do? And then I like that the most because now you've blocked the advance of pick it up fairly soon. Okay, right, so that is his position number 3, which is moving it back to the 6th rank. And then now if we look at what Averbakh says, he then looks at the C file where it comes a bit different. So we'll do that. Position 4 will be the same position as this, but on the C file. What does that do to our drawing zone? Okay, there, just on the screen capture there, that's what we're going to be looking at. But if the position is moved one file to the left, the game ends in a draw since the influence of the edge of the board becomes a factor. Okay, cool. So let's load up the simulator. It's the 4th position now, so we can see it. Put the rook in front. So he's playing black to move. And you can see that black to move in this position, the E1 square is not a win. And the line he gives, doesn't have to give a drawing zone for this one. Here white is unable to win. C2, and then you go rook A1. Not much else you're going to do. King C3, rook C1, because king B2 was threatened. Let's go through that line. We can actually go through the line. Let's have a look at what the simulator reckons about that. So basically, make it black to move. So black will play D2. You can move the rook around and come up with different drawing zones. So we're going to do this one, and I'm going to calculate it. You get a sense of how the squares work. Anyway, so just go over here. You can sort of see different possibilities. If the king's in check, then that stops the C2 move. So there's more drawing zones. In a lot of these positions, this is the king's not threatened. The rook's not threatened in some cases. We might find that Averbakh covers some different rook positions later on, but this just gives you a visual representation of the drawing zones. If you're checking that way, then it also gives you a bit more space. Okay, so let's quit out of that, and we'll load up the 4th position one. Okay, so let's go to the one he gives in the... So let's have a look at the drawing technique in these positions. Actually, there's nothing to be done. It actually runs away. If you push the pawn, then we just move up. So you can see all these squares here from A1, P1, A2, A3, B3 would have that possibility. Let's have a look at what the drawing line on C4 is. The pawn's attacked twice, so the pawn has to advance, and then we just move back. So you can see that's fairly trivial, right? But what we're not showing is, unfortunately, this is because it's outside the drawing zone, it's not showing it. Let me go back to the hover, go back to the simulator, and I'll just see if I can construct what I'm wanting. This is just sort of like a tool like this. I find it very useful looking thing. So this is the position we got, and we go change the result to draw. Right, so now we're going to see why these positions are draws. And I'll do a calculation again. As those red squares, as I mentioned, they represent sort of the key edge cases, which is the whole point of looking at it this way. And just familiarizing yourself with the tactics which are relevant for types of positions. Now, what Averbakh has said is that the edge of the board comes into play. So after I've created this file, we'll be able to have a look at the edge of the board and see what is what. Actually, we can see it here. So it's a bit messed up. You can't actually see the sort of the first. Right. Okay. Let's. So we'll quit out of this, and we'll load that up. Right. So obviously yellow has gone to this big zone. And this is exactly the position we want. So what happens in this position? Let's see how closely we are following Averbach's line. C2. Get the rook out of the way. Move across. You see, the problem is that if we don't move the rook back, like we do that, then the king's moving to b2 anyway. That was a threat. And that's the sort of position you get down when you take the pawn. Okay, cool. So that is why that critical square there is a draw. Let's find out why a4 is a draw. A4 looks more like a shouldering off situation. What does black do? Black attacks the rook. Rook has to move. Rook takes the pawn. rook moves somewhere else. Let's say rook moves there, add variation. And now, okay, we're just going to push up on draw. Yeah, that's clear. So I can see that this is the opposite way of using the drawing zone to understand Averbach's line, which he gives for why that position is a draw. So that's position number 4 with the pawn on the 6th rank, but on the C file. And you can see there's a different tactic you have to worry about. The sort of the king running around to B2, attacking the rook and threatening to promote at the same time. Okay, great. So let's move on to the next one now. Okay, position 5 is actually the same position as last time with the B file, same sort of drawing motifs. And now we're moving on to getting quite interesting in this position. The pawn on the 6th rank on the D file again, and the white king is kind of shouldered off. But what is the drawing zone? Let's just move our rook across. We'll change the result back to draw. And you can see that, in fact, that's I've backed up these things right. I believe there is some page which was originally wrong and corrected a long, long time ago, because obviously people have looked at this ad infinitum with even before table bases came out. So I've got the same drawing zone as Averbakh had, and you can see those squares around the outside are the critical ones. So let's have a quick look at what the drawing technique amounts to for those squares. By and large, the strategy will be march your king across and just pick up the pawn. And you can see like there's an A1 square, you'd move to B2. Now black can block you with his king, but if he blocks you with your king, then you just wait to move his king somewhere else, and then you can round up the black pawn. He ends up in a Zulane type position. But we'll see that later. And then from this side, same thing. You can see that black was holding white off. Eventually white's going to be able to pick the pawn up. We'll have a look at these in more detail later, because this is not really showing what I want. And what I want to do now is we'll go change the result to a draw with white to move. I want to understand what is wrong with being on G3 and F4. They're kind of those edge cases. Why are those ones there? Why can't white win in those positions? So let's do calculate again. And this way I end up with 2 BGN files. We'll look at the ones showing the winning technique first, and then we'll look at those 2 squares in particular to understand exactly why it's a draw. So this is why I've built this tool, so that I can look at these positions in a little more detail and have a look at the edge cases, which show you the main winning ideas or defensive resources, which is what you're really going to have to sort of know at the sort of your fingertips. Okay, let's fire up those 2 positions. Right, so this is the drawing one. So I want to go to the king there. Why is this a draw? Obviously, somehow or other, the black king can keep the white king away. So the line is check. King to d1 loses, right? Because you got like 1, 2, 3 moves. You've got to get the king out of the way. And basically, king d1, king f2, d2, king e3, and you've got transposed to those positions where the white rook will come behind and the pawn will drop. You got to block, right? So what's the threat here? To push the pawn and promote it, right? So there's a couple of lines being suggested here. Rook f8 check, and we just go back to that's the lines giving. Okay, let's try and something a little bit more resilient. What about moving our king across to f3? That makes sense. Add variation. Now push the pawn. Got to stop the pawn promoting. And then now it's going to promote. So it's if you go back to this position, you have got to know that on this check, you stay on the white king side of the board, and you effectively block it. So let's now look at I want to look at f4. Let's move along. F4. Why is this a draw? I think it's the same thing. Basically, the white king is shouldered off. Is a line given. Too late. Actually, it's a little bit cuter here, isn't it? We'll give the knight check, and this will be a draw. I don't know if we had to go for that line, but I guess we had to, because this is often there's another position which Averbakh mentions is we can't go to queen because we get checkmated. So this is the threat. Got a checkmate threat on the back rank. So we are forced to promote to a knight. So this is another tactic you really have to know. And then knight b2 loses, it gets taken, and that's the only drawing move. And we can hassle it. Go back to d1. Amazingly, all other moves lose. Go through knight b5. We drive the knight to a very bad square. Can't go to the back rank. Got to go to b5, and now it's very subtle. We go there. King can't move because you get checkmated, and the knight squares. Look at all these knight squares which are blocked. Knight just goes miles away. Gosh, this is something I wasn't really familiar with. G6. There's obviously a lot of tactics going on. I mean, this is another edge case. I'm not going to continue with this now, but this must be another edge case why certain knight moves are critical in this position. I mean, it makes more sense anyway. You want to keep your knight close to your king without getting checkmated, whereas in this case, the knight's just been driven. Now, in this position, got to play knight to c3, obviously, and this position, now knight d1 is the only drawing line. I've done a bit of potting around. This is actually a very complicated edge case in its own right. So knight d1 it is, not knight b5. So I'll look at that in a later video, I believe. Okay, cool. So this is the sort of the typical example, as you can see from the thumbnail there, drawing zone for this. Yeah, you're not say a typical position, but it's a pawn on the 6th rank with the white king shouldered off, which gives black some good drawing chances. And then we can now look at the winning zone version of this. Okay, here it is. And let's just quickly go through the technique. Exactly the same. Go to the bottom game. This looks a bit trickier. How does your king get around? Oh, we just take it. So that's no good. Forget about that. Huh. Okay, let's go to another interesting position. Maybe here's the most difficult position. But you just march your king in and you make it in time. That's square. You'd think you're a little bit shouldered off, but what's the winning way to do it? Check. Horses black king. Now we've got the opportunity to march our king across. And there's a discovered check, which gives you the extra move that you need. And if you'd gone the other way, then you check. Got to come back in here. Go behind. Oh, not that. Go behind. And that's it. That pawn's going to drop. Right, so you've got to keep in mind some of those tactics. The very useful checks can make black lose a tempo, and then he loses the game. So that was position number 6. Once again, you can see all of these Averbakh had these drawing zones correct. He's obviously gone through this thought process over the board. There's an analysis board, which is really good, very high standard. I think for today, we'll just do one more. Let me get the picture loaded up. Okay, you can see I've switched to position 7, which is the same as last time, except now the rook is defending on the 1st rank. And you can see the drawing zones are a little bit different. So let's fire that up in the simulator. Like the same position, isn't it? It's just the rook moves around a different square. So we'll go white move. And looks correct. Obviously, it's excluding positions. It's including squares on the G file, G2, G3, G4, but it's including G1. Interesting. That's interesting. So we'll have to have a close look at that because we had this position last time. And then now, I mean, you go over this side. I think that's quite interesting as well because I think black has much stronger ways of shouldering the white king away, so that becomes a draw in a lot more cases. So the white king has to be on the queen side to quickly scoop up the pawn. Anyway, you can many different combinations here, but this is the one, Averbakh position number 7, and we will just do the calculation. Okay, and we'll switch across to that file in the capture screen. Okay, over it. Previous file, unfortunately, because it's the same position. Okay, so let's have a look at the few of the key. Okay, here's the key position. If you're stuck on A1, what's the winning line? Let's have a look. Let's go through it. We march king across, blocked. Simple as that, right? You might say, why doesn't black try and get in the way? Not much to do here. You can see the check is what kills it. Okay, so that's fairly straightforward. What about, let's go to A4. Very similar, just march across. There, black did try to block, and you can see that's all over. Okay, good. What interests me the most will be this square here. Quite interesting. It's actually mate in 8 according to the engine. So let's go through the line. Check. King has to go somewhere. Take the pawn. Now that square is covered twice. So obviously it's not going through. So that's quite straightforward. And then the final one I want to look at, back to here. This position right here. God, is a weird position. So only one winning move, by the way. And let's have a look at how this works. King G2. Hey, King G2. That's not the winning move. And obviously the pawn's going to march straight through. That's it, right? Okay, so the winning line is to H2 check. Can go to E1 or go to E3. E1 is given. So what happens now? Just going to check him away, and the king gets in, and obviously we've seen lines like this before. What about king to d1? I check king across, trying to get across in time. Just keep behind the pawn. We've got it covered. So that actually, so the rook h2 check is the main key there, main move there. Okay, cool. So look, I'm going to stop it there. I mean, obviously, I think there's a whole bunch of these to keep on going through. Doing just completeness and trying to understand some of the little tactics going on myself. I think part of the thing is that once you've seen these, you think, okay, you can just calculate your way through it. But on the other hand, you need to have a really quick grasp of where the drawing and the winning zones are. And I'm stopping it there because I think that's sort of towards the end of the 6th rank ones. I mean, I think obviously you can shift it across to the C and the B file, may do that later. And then you get some more interesting ones where the pawn is further back, but the white king is like in a worse position, but there are some sneaky tactics, like there's that famous Reti study. So that's what we can look forward to when I get to continue this in later videos. Anyway, look, I just wanted to do that. Go back to edge cases. So there's little improvements I've made to SCID versus PC and the simulator. So that's sort of these little tools useful to be able to play around with. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that, and thank you very much for watching.